But I have to say, I do feel intimidated because I am neither a sports scholar nor a historian, and all of you are both sports scholars and historians. So this project is a kind of offshoot of a book. This presentation is an offshoot of a book that I co-authored that is on qualitative changes in the human-animal bond in Poland post-1989 that tries to tie these changes into the transition into democracy, a free market economy, capitalism. And I thought this particular part would be of interest to you as sports scholars, although of course it's not the only part in the book. The book is about to come out with Purdue University Press, and it's called Free Market Dogs: The Human-Animal Bond in Post-Communist Poland, and I have to say I'm very proud of the title being accepted by an academic publisher. Okay, this is going to be playing in the background as I speak. Oh, please play, come on. It's a video. Okay, I'm just going to speak then. You have to believe me that there's something that should be going on in the background then. Watching performances of Poland's top obedience teams at the 2016 World Championship tryouts, it is easy to observe the dogs' joy when performing the exercises. Their tails are almost constantly wagging. Their gaze is fixed on their handlers' faces. Their responses to the commands are brisk and enthusiastically joyful. The dogs seem to be excited in anticipation of the tasks awaiting them, yet it is an enthusiasm which is under control, curbed, at least as it appears, by the dog's own internal motivation, not by leashes or collars. In contrast, and here there should be another film clip, and I see maybe this one is going to play. It's not going to play. See, it was playing on my laptop, which is of course what happens when you don't check in advance. But anyway, this is a 1991, which is actually the oldest I could get, instructional video on obedience training in Poland. And it basically shows a guy jerking around this dog on a prong collar. And in contrast, the behavior of dogs in an instructional obedience video dated 1991, scripted and directed by communist Poland's most well-known dog trainer, Colonel Antoni Brzezicha, is strikingly different. As the dogs go through their paces, their heads and tails are invariably down, their movements cautious and slow. The dogs seem to be performing without much joy, grudgingly complying with the handler's demands. They invariably lag behind their handlers in off-leash exercises and rarely maintain eye contact with their humans, often displaying other signs of discomfort and stress, such as licking their lips and sniffing the ground, signs evident to the eye of a spectator with even a rudimentary knowledge of canine ethology. The change is glaring, and from a contemporary point of view, it's difficult not to ask, did the handlers and judges not see that the dogs were not enjoying themselves? Why did the judges not demand and reward a more joyful performance? Why were the trainers unable to elicit such a performance? These are all questions from a 21st century perspective, and they are valid only within a contemporary mindset, one in which the goal of dog training is defined differently than it had been 25 years ago. Clearly, what must have happened in the meantime, between 1991 and 2016, is not simply a change of training methods, but a change of training philosophy. In 1991, the judge saw nothing wrong with the performances he observed. On the contrary, the dogs were rewarded precisely because they reflected, or their behavior reflected, the prevailing understanding of the human-canine relationship at the time. The dog was expected to submit to the human. There is little joy in forced submission, thus joy would not have been an expected element of the dog's performance. The performances from the top 2016 level of obedience competitors suggest that value is now placed on the dog's enjoyment of the process of training, and simultaneously also on the strength and beauty of the resulting human-canine bond. The purpose of this presentation, The purpose of this presentation is to theorize the changes in dog training philosophy geared toward competitive canine events in Poland post-1989 and tie these changes to the recent proliferation of canine-human sporting and leisure activities. The goal is to show not only how training methods have changed, but also how expectations related to the dog's performance have changed along with them. Such an interpretation reveals how changes in training are part of a broader redefinition of the human-canine bond and reflect changes in the dog's place in contemporary Polish society. I argue that the emergence of a plethora of new canine performance events in the 21st century is itself entangled in these changes. It is a sign that dog guardians are actively seeking new ways of interacting with their dogs, ways that reflect postmodern notions of identity, exhibit a changed understanding of what it means to care for a dog, and prioritize the nurturing of canine happiness over expectations of submission. While this presentation focuses on the significance of the current explosion of activities on the canine sports scene, a few words are due on dog training events in Poland before 1989. Dog training competitions in Poland between World War II and '89 were relatively few and far between. The events that did take place can be divided into three major groups: obedience competitions and exams, protection dog competitions and exams, and various types of hunting dog competitions and exams. With the exception of obedience competitions, the events were closely tied to dogs' presumed usefulness to humans, and even obedience exercises were presented as a more publicly available version of exercises for working dogs, meaning police dogs and military dogs. Training events in communist Poland were explicitly geared toward proving dogs' usefulness to humans, and the word utility appears a total of 26 times in the first obedience rulebook published in 1979, from which I'm quoting here. Meanwhile, contemporary canine performance events seem to reverse this logic and try to prove humans' usefulness to dogs. That is, they are attempts at finding activities that function as substitute outlets for a bored urban dog's energy. While some animal studies scholars, and here I'm quoting from a particular relatively well-known philosopher, Australian philosopher, Paul Patton, claim that all training is necessarily about sophisticated techniques of making the animal share the goals of the trainer, the explosion of canine-related competitive and semi-competitive events in the 2000s in Poland counters this claim, at least explicitly, because these new activities are designed as outlets for a dog's natural needs, albeit in a new, modern and urban context. It seems that instead of instilling the values of the human in the dog, the existence of this trend suggests that the values of the dog now determine the activity that the dog and the human engage in. The human chooses from a plethora of activities available, basing her, less often his, this is interestingly a very female-dominated at this point range of activities, choice basing on the dog's talents and aptitudes, on the dog's desires. In other words, I pose that the very existence of the canine sports scene is a reflection of the changes in the human-animal relationship. This is not to say that training now is not about power. Of course it is. But it certainly takes into account dog agency. And interestingly, the arrival of these new performance events corresponds in time with the outburst in positive training methods. Most of the new sports explicitly endorse positive training techniques in the rulebooks. A survey of the motivation of Polish participants in canine-related sports activities carried out in 2010-2011 proved that the humans' motivation for participating in such activities is primarily their desire to deepen the emotional bond with their dogs, to find an outlet for the dog's energy, and to make new friends and be part of a social group. As an aside, the research also revealed that the respondents were predominantly female, urban dwellers, and significantly younger than suggested by results of similar research carried out in other countries. Canada and the US are the ones that have been the best researched. A brief look at the history of canine performance events in Poland reveals that in the mid-2000s, so relatively recently, 10 years ago, they suddenly began multiplying in numbers. In 2016, the canine event scene in Poland consists of multiple sports that appeared only after the systemic transformation, and actually mostly only in the past decade. These include obedience, although according to different rules, international FCI rules, agility, there will be more about this sport later on, rally obedience, which is a cross between obedience and agility. This is canine disc, also known as dog Frisbee. Yes. Mantrailing, which is basically following the scent of a human being. Flyball, two teams of dogs race across a set of hurdles to retrieve a tennis ball. Interestingly, the Polish team is now the holder of the European world record, beating the British Jolly Jumpers twice in a row. Dummy trials, which is a derivative of field trials, but the dog retrieves a plastic dummy, not a real bird. Search and rescue. While not a competitive event, this activity only opened up to amateurs after '89, and it involves a multiple level certification program. There's weight pulling, there's water rescue, similarly to search and rescue, but the certification program is open to all dogs. Dogtrekking, okay, which is, I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. Herding trials, various kinds, and herding trials appear in Poland only in 2005, so it has been just 10 years since the first herding trial took place. In Britain it was 1860 in Bala, Wales. Various kinds of mushing events, including canicross. There we go. Bike drawing, where the dog runs along a bicycle. Dock diving, dogs jumping into a pool off a dock. The longest jump wins, and there is also a version of this that is called extreme vertical, where it's the highest jump that wins. Speedway, which is basically a timed recall to handler contest. Canine freestyle, also known as doggy dancing or heel work to music. And tray ball, the herding of inflatable plastic balls. The classic trio of canine sports practiced in communist Poland, obedience by local Polish rules, protection dog trials, and hunting trials, have been pushed to the margins of the canine sports scene, although they are still present. Men still dominate protection and field dog trials. Agility is the oldest, where do I have this? Yeah. Is the oldest among the new arrivals. The first sanctioned agility trials were organized in Poland in the early 90s. However, the number of trials increased only in the mid-2000s, with the largest events gathering up to 400 participants from several neighboring countries. The first Polish competitor to win a medal at the FCI World Championships was Olga Kwiecień in 2012. While agility regulations do not explicitly mandate the use of positive training methods, they do emphasize that agility is an educational and sporting activity intended to improve the dog's integration into society. Integration into society is, of course, something of a blanket term, but it does underscore that which I have been emphasizing as the general impulse of modern canine performance sports, the inclusion of the dog as a significant other in the human's everyday life practices. In Poland, and not only there, agility is a sport dominated by women and practiced largely by city dwellers. Agility is usually taught through increasingly sophisticated techniques that build on the dog's prey drive. While not all training may be purely positive, however we define that, all handbooks emphasize the fun aspect of the sport and its role as a remedy for canine boredom. It is not coincidental that the title of the first agility handbook published in Polish, which I'm quoting from here, is Agility, Sport and Fun. Similarly, it is not coincidental that the book's reviews emphasize that one of its advantages is in displaying that agility is something new and that the entire process is fun. It serves the purpose of alleviating boredom and strengthening the bond one has with one's pet. Canine disc is one of the activities in which Polish competitors shine on the international arena, a result of the determination of one individual who almost single-handedly devoted his life to promoting the sport among Polish dog guardians. Interestingly, this is the one canine sport that you do not have in the UK. It has not caught on at all, so there are no trials. As of 2015, local Polish trials bring together approximately 200 human-canine teams and are quite impressive in scope, often generating the interest of local and national media and attracting crowds of spectators. Similarly to agility, though in an even more obvious way, canine disc is also based on a redirection of the dog's prey drive, the desire to chase and intercept fleeing prey, transferred onto an inanimate object, a plastic disc. Radomski, one of the founders of this sport in Poland, advertises the sport as a possible lifesaver for the unruly and disobedient dog, the dog whose owner cannot keep him from chasing cars and bicycles or destroying furniture. While it remains to be examined whether the top dogs in the sport are truly obedience school dropouts who have found a sense of purpose in catching plastic, the sport does attract a crowd of participants who see it as a fun outlet for a dog's excessive energy, and for whom the competitive aspect of the sport is only secondary. And here you can see the quotations from people who participate in the trial. It's all fun, right? The dog takes part in trials, but for her it's all fun. It's like catching prey. There are no commands, no coercion. For her, it's just the pleasure of catching a disc. Both agility and canine disc are sports that function as substitute outlets for a dog's prey drive. Consequently, it is the dogs whose prey drive is the most developed who have a competitive advantage over others in these sports, although other factors cannot be discounted. But a number of competitive and semi-competitive events, not explicitly based on prey drive, have also appeared. One of them is dogtrekking, a cross between orienteering and taking the dog out for a walk. Here, human-canine teams with map and compass in hand tackle a course designed specifically to highlight the beauty of the landscape. This is a timed event, and the team with the shortest time and that hits all the checkpoints along the route wins. Canicross is a faster-paced version of this endeavor. There are no checkpoints, and the route is well marked, with the stroll turning into a long-distance run. Since 2003, when the first event was organized in Poland, dogtrekking has exploded in popularity, becoming one of the favorite events, particularly for parents with children. The family category is developing the most rapidly, while entries in all categories average approximately 200 teams per event. Dogtrekking does not require sophisticated training techniques, though it certainly helps if the dog is willing to pull the handler, and is not easily distracted by the presence of other dogs. It does not even require a recall, as the dogs are always on leash, as stipulated by the regulations. The team's success thus depends mostly on the handler's stamina and orienteering skills, but for most participants, the competitive aspect is absolutely secondary. The sport is a way of including the dog in an individual human's, sometimes family's, passion for the outdoors, while providing the dog with much-needed exercise. The discipline's selling point is in fact its laid-back and non-competitive character. Mantrailing, which is basically the tracking of a scent of a human being, is also a semi-competitive event whose popularity is growing among canine guardians. While the obedience and protection dog exams in communist Poland often included a tracking component, the dog's performance on the track was judged according to very strict criteria. The dog's head had to be down, he had to be moving at a steady pace, he had to indicate each turn of the track in a precise way. Points were lost each time the dog went off track and raised his head. In contrast, mantrailing tracks are evaluated on a pass or fail basis. The dog has to find the person hidden at the end of the track. It is telling that the rules of mantrailing competency tests describe the activity not as proving the dog's usefulness to humans, as had been the case with tracking tests under communism, but as a form of activity that naturally creates a strong human-canine bond and leads to mutual respect and trust. This outburst of variety in canine-related activities can be interpreted with regard to the notion of individualization, which has been employed by various theorists to explain how postmodern individuals are faced with an increased number of choices they must make to shape their lives in a way that best reflects their perceived individuality. Ulrich Beck argued that individualization is connected to changes in social and family structure. The individual has replaced social class or the nuclear family as the fundamental unit of social reproduction. However, the dog is no mere accessory to the human individual here. Bearing in mind how concerned the guardians were with choosing the right activity for their dog, one can rather speak of extending the notion of individualization onto the canine partner. Of course, it is the human who makes the choice, but this choice is then evaluated through establishing the dog's level of enjoyment of the activity. It is not uncommon on the Polish dog sports scene to switch between sports should a dog not exhibit enjoyment, or try several activities with a young dog and continue with the one which the dog finds the most fun. This is some photographs from tray balls, so the herding of inflatable plastic balls, and this border collie, red border collie up there. He was actually purchased by a girl, bought as a puppy by a girl who had practiced agility previously. She got him to do agility with her, and it turned out that he had hip dysplasia, so he couldn't jump. So she does tray ball, the herding of plastic balls, with him because she lives in the city. So rather than, and this is quite common, rather than replacing, getting rid of these dogs, these people engage or find an activity that the dogs can participate in safely and that they find enjoyable. The emergence of the canine sports scene is also a reflection of Poland's transition into a free market economy. The human consumer chooses from a variety of options the product that they see as the best suited to the needs of the canine human team they represent. While the talents and aptitudes of the dog are listed as primary decisive factors, the human's preferences are certainly also taken into account. In turn, each sport entices would-be aficionados with promises of a uniquely crafted, fun experience. In fact, the sports seem to be vying for the title of the most positive sport, the one which promises to deliver the most enjoyable experience to the dog. The strategy assumed by many of the sports consists of breaking the association between the particular sport and the traditional understanding of dog obedience as enforcing canine submission to the human. It seems that canine performance events could be classified as lifestyle sports or alternative sports because most are not highly competitive in nature and are based on a definition of sport that differs from one which emphasizes individual achievement and competition with others. In the case of canine performance sports, although there is still insufficient research, it seems that the dog's well-being and enjoyment are usually placed over and above the human's desire to win, at least on the level of declaration. Furthermore, it is the non-competitive sports, or at least the ones that downplay the competitive aspect, that are the most dynamically gaining in popularity. The goal of this paper is to show the links between the emergence of contemporary canine sports scene in Poland and the positive training revolution. I set out to prove that the turn to the newer and more positive methods among participants in canine events, analyzed in relation to the explicit goals of these activities as expressed in rulebooks and understood by the participants themselves, is not just an attempt to come up with less physically intrusive and more sophisticated methods of creating docile bodies serving human needs. There is a genuine desire among the trainers associated with these sports to identify and meet a dog's real psychological and physical needs. As a result, this analysis does enter into something of an aesthetical moral defense of animal training, to use the category criticized by Paul Patton in the opening of this presentation. As an aside, I am aware that it is impossible to disentangle the identification of pre-existing needs from the creation of new ones, from the emergence of a value system that is shared by both the animal and the human. However, it is the decision to enter into a relationship with a non-human other and the desire to shape that relationship as an ethical relationship that seem to be the structuring elements here. All the other decisions follow from the desire to develop this relationship with the non-human's best interests in mind. This is what accounts for the qualitative change of the human-animal bond in the newer sporting events. This new relationship is primarily an affective one, while the old one was based, at least overtly, on different categories, usually those of utility. I have also identified the canine sports scene as a symptomatically postmodern phenomenon related to notions of risk, individualization, and reflexivity, and reflecting the postmodern plurality of ready-made templates of lifestyle choices that seem to be infinitely proliferating. This emphasis in lifestyle sports, which I have identified as a broader category into which canine sports may be classified, is not on individual achievement, but on enjoyment of the activity. Finally, I see the proliferation of sporting events as tied to the postmodern imperative to enjoy oneself, one that caring guardians see as referring to their dogs as well, not just to themselves. In the context of Poland, it comes as no surprise that the canine performance sports scene emerged only after the transition from socialism to capitalism, which underscores the uneasy connection between consumerism and qualitative changes in the contemporary human-canine bond. I should also mention something that I forgot to say in the beginning, that is, looking at these sports, I am completely omitting this notion of the event that is called just dog show, so where dogs are evaluated on the basis of how they look, crafts, and so on. And I am also not looking at the kinds of events in which dogs and humans do not cooperate, So greyhound racing, for instance, is also outside of my sphere of interests here, although it's also interesting that the hound racing never evolved into an activity, a popular activity in Poland anyway. Well, greyhounds are clearly a British breed, not a Polish breed anyways. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got a few minutes for questions. Rob?
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Thank you.
If you were to contextualize, or rather explain historically, sociologically, why this transformation occurred in human-animal interactions.
Not in 3 minutes.
These are the main historical things that you can perhaps relate us to.
Yeah, well, there really have been books written about it, and there's actually even a book out recently by Rutledge on animals in sport as well. But certainly, why you're asking the question? Well, there are multiple theories, sociological theories mostly, and kind of philosophical theories as well about how, in fact, modernism is, modernism, of course, understood here as a kind of historical period, is this moment of categorizing, classifying, and kind of getting rid of this animal presence in private space, but also in urban space. And postmodernism is a kind of re-emergence of the desire to be messy, to be messy in a kind of course, metaphorical way. Although dog hair is another issue. To mix with others, to get rid of that easy boundary between the human and the animal. This is in a way what animal studies as a field, as a discipline is about problematizing the very existence of this boundary as one that has been artificially constructed and that yet somehow we were all raised upon. In the case of Poland, we can kind of pinpoint to specific factors. I think it's a kind of really nice case because we can show so many things. Like we have a new democracy, the entrance of capitalism, and this kind of sudden proliferation of options, of opportunities that people can engage in. It's very easy to analyze it akin to the opening of the capitalist economy, where the handler here is also a kind of consumer choosing from among a variety of options that are available to him. Something that would not have been possible under the previous system. But that's only a part of it. I mean, there's much more to be said about it. Thank you for the question. Yeah?
Yeah. You mentioned that there was a proliferation in canine sports in the mid-2000s.
Yes.
Is that anything to do with the accession of Poland to the European Union?
I don't think so, though. But it would be lovely if it worked that way. But unfortunately, it would make for a very kind of beautiful flowing around argument. But it doesn't. The reality is that in the communist period, there was an organization, an association, the Polish Kennel Club, that seemed to regulate all canine-related activities. And after '89, for a long time, and this was a kind of very communist-run organization, I mean, in terms of style, administration, and so on. And it seemed somewhat impossible, I think, to Polish dog people. It was not something that they could conceive, that they could do things with their dogs outside of the Polish Kennel Club, that they didn't need the Polish Kennel Club to sanction whatever it is that they were doing. And simply what happened is that in 2003, 2004, there was this one individual, one guy, who organized another association that was a kind of, that went against the Polish Kennel Club, but that was also a kind of dog-related association. And then these organizations started springing up and kind of offering sanctioning to these activities. So in other words, obedience trials, right, used to be regulated by the Polish Kennel Club, and nowadays you have rally obedience that is sanctioned by the Polish Rally Obedience Association. These disc events sanctioned by, actually they're sanctioned by the US Disc Dog Nationals, or whatever it is that they're called. So kind of this notion of kind of splitting ways with the Polish Kennel Club, which is a very nasty organization in itself. And it's kind of dying slowly, which is a good thing in my eyes.
Any more?
Yes?
One more, Marcus.
The herding, we don't come from as one man and his dog.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about one man?
Yes, I know what it is, but it has never been shown on Polish television, so no. It's actually one of the kind of niche events. It's not very popular. And it came about through a certain fascination with Anglo-Saxon culture, both American and British culture, that again is very visible when you look at Polish culture post-1989. It's not that Poland pre-1989 was not fascinated with America, it was, but clearly post-1989 it becomes much easier to kind of build upon that fascination because of the availability of, well, material commodities that are associated with culture. So, for example, pre-1989, there were no border collies in Poland. The breed was simply unavailable. It's a British breed. And the first border collies appeared in the mid-90s. So how can you talk about herding trials, the border collie style herding trials, without border collies being there? Okay, so it's more a result of this kind of, not specifically like one man and his dog, but in general, this kind of influx of, well, fascination with Anglo culture. Yeah.
I'm really glad we took that paper just the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you.